This isn't mine. Has Ryan told you about me yet?
Have you ever found something so small that it shattered everything you believed about your life? A single object, barely noticeable, something that could fit in the palm of your hand. Yet in a single heartbeat, it had the power to erase years of trust, replace certainty with questions, and make every memory feel different. That is exactly what happened to Natalie Foster, a 45-year-old woman from Colorado who believed she knew the man she had shared her life with for more than 2 decades. She believed she knew his routines, his habits, his dreams, and most importantly, his heart. But one ordinary afternoon, while doing something millions of spouses have done without thinking twice, she uncovered a secret that made her wonder if the man she loved had been living another life right in front of her. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It started on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Natalie's husband, Ryan Calloway, had left early that morning for what he described as another business trip. Nothing about his departure seemed unusual. He kissed her goodbye, promised he would be home in 2 days, and drove away in his dark gray SUV just as he had done dozens of times before. Their marriage appeared stable to everyone around them. Friends admired them. Neighbors often described them as the couple everyone hoped to become one day. They had weathered financial struggles, celebrated promotions, raised children together, and built a comfortable life that looked strong from every angle. Natalie never imagined that within the next hour, she would question every chapter of that life. She decided to surprise Ryan by cleaning his SUV before he returned. It was something she occasionally did without mentioning it to him. She gathered cleaning supplies, turned on the garage lights, and began wiping down the dashboard, vacuuming the seats, and removing old receipts from the center console. It was an ordinary chore that should have ended like every other weekend task. Instead, it became the moment that divided her life into before and after. As she reached beneath the driver's seat to retrieve what she assumed was a dropped pen or loose change, her fingertips brushed against something cold and smooth. At first, she thought it might be a coin or perhaps one of Ryan's tools that had slipped under the seat. She stretched her hand farther until she finally wrapped her fingers around the object. When she pulled it into the light, her entire body went still. Resting in her hand was an elegant diamond wedding ring. It sparkled even beneath the dim garage light. Natalie stared at it for several seconds, unable to process what she was seeing. The ring was beautiful, expensive, and unmistakably a wedding band. But it wasn't hers. Ryan had never given her another wedding ring after they were married. Confused, she slowly turned the ring over and noticed delicate words engraved on the inside. Her breathing became shallow as she read them aloud. Forever begins E and D. The initials meant nothing to her. Her name didn't begin with E. Ryan's name certainly didn't begin with D. Every explanation she tried to invent collapsed the moment she looked at that engraving again. If the ring wasn't hers, then whose was it? And why had it been hidden beneath her husband's driver's seat? She immediately grabbed her phone and called Ryan. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. She called again. No answer. A 3rd time. Still nothing. Ryan had always answered her calls, especially when he was traveling. The silence on the other end felt louder than any conversation they had ever shared. Natalie sat at the kitchen table, holding the ring as though it might suddenly explain itself. Her thoughts raced from one possibility to another. Was Ryan having an affair? Had someone borrowed his vehicle? Had she misunderstood something obvious? She wanted desperately to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Yet every minute that passed without hearing his voice made the questions heavier. She examined every detail of the ring again, hoping she had overlooked something that would calm her fears. Instead, another unexpected moment arrived. Exactly 10 minutes after her final unanswered phone call, the doorbell rang. Natalie wasn't expecting visitors. She placed the ring in her pocket, walked slowly toward the front door, and opened it. Standing on her porch was a woman she had never seen before. The woman appeared calm, almost as though she had rehearsed what she was about to say. She looked directly into Natalie's eyes and quietly asked a question that would change everything. "Has Ryan told you about me yet?" At that instant, Natalie realized the wedding ring was only the beginning of a story far more complicated than she could have imagined. What she didn't know was that every answer she was searching for would lead her into a past Ryan had spent years trying to leave behind. And before this story reached its conclusion, the truth would test every promise, every memory, and every belief they had built together. Natalie Foster had always believed that trust wasn't built through grand promises. It was built through ordinary days. 23 years of marriage had taught her that real love was found in small routines. Every morning, she woke before sunrise to prepare coffee while Ryan Calloway read the morning news at the kitchen table. Every Friday evening, they ordered takeout from the same family-owned restaurant a few miles from their home in Colorado. Every anniversary, Ryan surprised her with fresh flowers, even during years when money was tight. Their children were now adults, living lives of their own, and friends often joked that Natalie and Ryan had finally reached the easy stage of marriage. They had survived financial hardships, career changes, family illnesses, and every challenge life had placed before them. Looking back, Natalie could not remember a single moment when she had genuinely questioned Ryan's loyalty. He wasn't perfect, but he had always been dependable. That was why the diamond ring resting in her pocket felt impossible to understand. It wasn't just another piece of jewelry. It represented a question that threatened every memory she had of the man she loved. As she stared at the unfamiliar woman standing on her porch, she couldn't help wondering whether the life she believed was real had quietly been slipping away for months, or perhaps even years, without her ever noticing. The woman standing outside appeared to be around 40 years old. She was neatly dressed, carried herself with confidence, and spoke with surprising calm. There was no anger in her voice, no nervousness, and no sign that she was about to deliver news capable of destroying another person's marriage. Natalie searched her face, hoping something about her expression would provide an explanation. Instead, the silence between them seemed to stretch endlessly until Natalie finally managed to ask who she was. The woman hesitated before introducing herself as Vanessa Monroe. She didn't offer a last name immediately, nor did she explain why she had come. Instead, her eyes briefly shifted toward the wedding photograph hanging in the hallway behind Natalie. She smiled sadly before looking back and quietly repeated her question. "Has Ryan told you about me yet?" Natalie felt her pulse quicken. Every instinct told her not to reveal what she had found inside Ryan's SUV. She simply answered no. Vanessa nodded slowly, almost as though she had expected that response all along. She reached into her handbag, removed a folded envelope, and handed it to Natalie without another word. Before Natalie could ask another question, Vanessa turned, walked back to a silver sedan parked across the street, and drove away. The encounter lasted less than 3 minutes, yet Natalie already knew her life had changed forever. For several moments, Natalie remained standing in the doorway, holding the envelope. She considered chasing after Vanessa, but the car had already disappeared around the corner. Closing the front door behind her, she returned to the kitchen and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Ryan standing beside Vanessa outside what appeared to be a modest suburban home. The picture wasn't blurry or taken from a distance. It looked as though someone had intentionally posed for it. Ryan wasn't smiling, but he certainly didn't appear uncomfortable. On the back of the photograph, someone had handwritten an address and a date from only 3 weeks earlier. Natalie immediately checked her calendar. Ryan had told her he was attending a construction conference that weekend in another city. According to the photograph, he had been somewhere entirely different. She studied every inch of the picture, searching for clues. There were no romantic gestures between Ryan and Vanessa. They weren't holding hands or embracing. Even so, the image raised more questions than answers. Why had Ryan lied about where he was? Why did Vanessa have this photograph? And what possible connection could exist between her, the mysterious wedding ring, and the initials engraved inside it? Natalie wanted desperately to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but each new discovery seemed to move her farther away from one. Her first instinct was to call Ryan again. She dialed his number, hoping this time he would answer. Once again, the call went straight to voicemail. She sent a short message asking him to call as soon as possible. Minutes passed without a reply. Natalie rarely checked Ryan's location because she had never felt the need to monitor him. But now she opened the location-sharing app they both used during family vacations. His location was unavailable. She told herself it was probably because of poor signal coverage, yet the timing only added to her growing concern. She walked back to the garage, determined to search the SUV more carefully. This time, she examined every compartment, every storage pocket, and every space beneath the seats. Hidden inside the center console was a parking receipt she had never seen before. It listed the same neighborhood written on the back of the photograph. Ryan had been there more than once. That realization settled heavily in her mind. This wasn't an accidental visit or a wrong turn. Whatever brought him there had become part of his routine. Natalie placed the receipt beside the photograph and the wedding ring on the kitchen table. Individually, none of them proved betrayal. Together, however, they painted a picture she could no longer ignore. That evening, Natalie sat alone in the living room replaying the past several months. Ryan had become more distracted than usual. He often stepped outside to answer phone calls, explaining they were work-related. Business trips had become more frequent, sometimes lasting an extra day because of unexpected meetings. He had started locking his phone, something he had never done before. Natalie remembered asking about it once, and Ryan had laughed, saying cybersecurity rules at work required stronger privacy. At the time, the explanation sounded reasonable. Now, every small change returned to her memory with new meaning. She wasn't ready to accuse him of anything, but she also couldn't pretend nothing had happened. She knew one thing for certain. She needed answers before Ryan came home. The address on the back of the photograph continued pulling at her thoughts. If Ryan wouldn't tell her the truth, perhaps that address would. Little did Natalie know. The decision she was about to make would uncover a story that had remained hidden for more than 20 years. And by the time she learned the full truth, she would discover that the wedding ring was connected to a chapter of Ryan's life he believed had been buried forever. Natalie barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the diamond ring resting on her kitchen table, the unfamiliar initials engraved inside it, and Vanessa Monroe standing calmly at her front door, as if she already knew Natalie was about to discover a truth she had never been prepared to face. By sunrise, Natalie had made a decision. She wasn't going to confront Ryan over the phone, and she wasn't going to accuse him without knowing exactly what she was dealing with. If there was an explanation, she wanted to hear it after she had gathered enough information to separate facts from assumptions. She placed the photograph, the handwritten address, and the parking receipt into her purse before getting into her own car. The drive across Colorado felt much longer than it actually was. Every mile gave her another opportunity to turn around, but something deep inside refused to let her stop. She needed to know why her husband had visited that neighborhood, why he had hidden it from her, and why a stranger believed Ryan should have already told her about her existence. By the time Natalie reached the quiet suburban street, she realized there was nothing remarkable about it. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, neatly trimmed lawns stretched across every yard, and American flags hung from several front porches. It looked like the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names. Nothing about it suggested secrets, yet Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. The address led her to a modest brick house at the very end of the street. It wasn't luxurious or neglected. It simply looked lived in. Fresh flowers lined the front walkway, and a wind chime gently moved with the afternoon breeze. Natalie parked several houses away, where she could observe without attracting attention. She reminded herself that she wasn't there to spy on anyone. She only wanted to understand why Ryan had come there. Minutes turned into nearly an hour. Just as she began wondering whether she had made a mistake, a familiar dark gray SUV slowly entered the neighborhood. Natalie's heart immediately began pounding. It was Ryan's vehicle. She watched as he parked directly in front of the house without hesitation. He didn't check the address or look around as though he were unfamiliar with the area. Instead, he stepped out carrying a small paper bag and walked confidently toward the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened from the inside. Vanessa Monroe greeted him with a warm smile. Natalie leaned forward, expecting the painful confirmation every suspicious spouse fears. She expected an embrace, a kiss, or some unmistakable sign of secret relationship. Instead, Ryan simply handed Vanessa the paper bag, and the two walked into the house without touching each other. Natalie frowned. It wasn't what she expected, but it also didn't answer a single question. Determined to learn more, Natalie remained where she was. Nearly 20 minutes passed before movement inside the home caught her attention. The curtains shifted slightly, revealing Ryan helping an elderly man into a wheelchair near the living room window. The man appeared frail, his silver hair neatly combed, his movements slow and deliberate. Ryan knelt beside him, speaking gently before adjusting a blanket across the man's lap. Natalie stared in complete confusion. This wasn't the picture of an affair she had imagined during the sleepless night before. It looked more like someone caring for an aging family member or an old friend. A few minutes later, Vanessa emerged carrying several grocery bags while Ryan followed with medical supplies. Together, they loaded everything into the house before sitting on the front porch beside the elderly man. Even from across the street, Natalie noticed something unusual. Their conversation appeared serious but peaceful. There were no romantic gestures, no signs of affection beyond ordinary kindness. Still, one question continued haunting her. If there was nothing inappropriate happening, why had Ryan hidden this place from her? Why had he lied about his business trips? And why had he never once mentioned Vanessa or the elderly man during 23 years of marriage? Natalie considered walking to the front door and demanding answers immediately, but she knew emotions would only cloud whatever truth awaited her. Instead, she quietly started her car and drove home, more confused than ever. The drive back felt heavier than the journey there. Natalie replayed everything she had witnessed, searching for a logical explanation. Perhaps Vanessa was a distant relative Ryan had recently discovered. Maybe the elderly man had once worked with Ryan years ago. Every possibility sounded reasonable until she remembered the diamond wedding ring. No matter how many innocent explanations she imagined for Ryan's visits, none could explain why another wedding ring had been hidden beneath his driver's seat or why it carried the engraving, "Forever Begins, E&D." When she arrived home, she spread every piece of evidence across the dining room table. The photograph, the receipt, the handwritten address, the ring. She noticed something she had overlooked before. The date written behind the photograph matched one of the weekends Ryan had insisted he was attending a company conference. Natalie retrieved an old family calendar and compared several other travel dates with credit card statements stored in their home office. Again and again, she found purchases made near the same neighborhood. This hadn't happened once. It had happened repeatedly over several months. Ryan hadn't simply forgotten to tell her something. He had deliberately hidden an important part of his life. Late that evening, Ryan finally returned her phone call. His voice sounded tired but calm, completely unaware of what Natalie had discovered. He apologized for missing her calls, explaining that meetings had kept him busy throughout the day. Natalie listened quietly without interrupting. For the first time in their marriage, she recognized a lie while hearing it spoken. Ryan wasn't hundreds of miles away at a business meeting. She had watched him spend the afternoon inside that small brick house. Fighting every urge to confront him immediately, Natalie simply told him she hoped he had a safe trip home. Ryan thanked her, said he loved her, and ended the call. Natalie remained silent long after the line disconnected. Hearing those familiar words no longer brought comfort. Instead, they reminded her how little she truly understood about the man she had trusted for more than 2 decades. She knew she couldn't continue pretending everything was normal. The next time Ryan walked through their front door, one conversation would begin unraveling a secret that had remained hidden for over 25 years, and Natalie had no idea whether that truth would save her marriage or destroy it forever. Ryan returned home the following evening just after sunset. From the outside, everything looked exactly as it always had. He parked the SUV in the driveway, walked through the front door carrying an overnight bag, smiled at Natalie, and leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. For a brief moment, she wondered how someone could appear so calm while carrying such an enormous secret. She forced herself to smile back, hiding the storm of questions racing through her mind. During dinner, Ryan talked about delayed meetings, heavy traffic, and construction deadlines, as though nothing unusual had happened. Natalie listened carefully, noticing every detail. She wasn't just hearing his words anymore. She was measuring them against everything she had already discovered. When he mentioned spending the afternoon with clients in another city, she knew he was lying. She had watched him from across the street as he carried groceries into the brick house at the end of the quiet neighborhood. Still, she refused to interrupt him. She wanted to hear how far the story would go. When dinner ended, Ryan carried his plate to the sink and thanked her for the meal. Natalie took a slow breath before quietly placing the diamond wedding ring on the kitchen counter between them. Ryan froze instantly. The color drained from his face. His eyes remained fixed on the ring for several seconds before he slowly looked up at Natalie. She asked only one question. "Whose ring is this?" The silence that followed felt endless. Ryan opened his mouth as though searching for the right words, but none came. Finally, he whispered, "I was hoping you would never find it." Natalie waited for an explanation, but Ryan remained silent. Instead of denying anything, he lowered his head and rested both hands against the kitchen counter. His reaction frightened Natalie more than any argument could have. If there was an innocent explanation, why wasn't he giving it? She placed a photograph beside the ring, then the parking receipt. Finally, she mentioned Vanessa Monroe by name. Ryan's expression changed completely. It wasn't the look of a man caught cheating. It looked more like someone whose past had unexpectedly returned after years of trying to leave it behind. He quietly asked where she had met Vanessa. Natalie explained everything from finding the ring beneath the driver's seat to following him to the brick house. Ryan closed his eyes for several moments before taking a deep breath. "I never wanted you to learn about this like this," he said softly. Natalie interrupted him. "Then tell me now." Ryan looked toward the living room window before answering. "I can't. Not yet." Those 3 words hit Natalie harder than any confession could have. After 23 years of marriage, he was still choosing silence. Without another word, Ryan picked up his car keys and walked outside. Natalie watched through the window as he sat alone inside the SUV for nearly an hour without driving anywhere. Whatever he was hiding, it was powerful enough to leave both of them trapped in silence. The next morning, Natalie realized waiting for Ryan to explain wasn't an option anymore. She needed answers, even if she had to find them herself. Through a trusted friend, she contacted a licensed private investigator named Grant Sullivan, a former police detective with decades of experience uncovering long-forgotten records and missing pieces of family histories. Natalie didn't ask him to prove Ryan was unfaithful. She simply wanted to know who Vanessa Monroe was and why Ryan had hidden her existence for so many years. Grant listened carefully without making assumptions. He explained that many investigations begin with simple questions, but often uncover stories no one expects. Within days, he began tracing public records, archived newspapers, old property documents, and court files connected to Ryan's early adulthood. Most of Ryan's history appeared exactly as Natalie remembered him describing over the years. He had grown up in a small Colorado town, worked his way through college, built a successful career, and met Natalie in his mid-20s. But there was one period of his life that seemed strangely incomplete. Nearly 2 years before Ryan met Natalie, official records became unusually difficult to follow. Addresses changed unexpectedly. Newspaper mentions stopped. Several people connected to Ryan simply disappeared from public records during the same period. Grant admitted he had rarely seen gaps like that unless unusual circumstances had been involved. 3 days later, Grant called Natalie with the first major breakthrough. Years before Ryan had ever met her, he had been engaged to marry a young woman named Vanessa Monroe. Natalie felt her heart sink. The name confirmed what she had feared from the beginning. Grant explained that according to archived engagement announcements published in a local newspaper, Ryan and Vanessa had planned to marry nearly 25 years earlier. Friends described them as deeply devoted to one another, and their wedding had already been scheduled. Then, without warning, the engagement ended. Publicly, people believed Vanessa had left town without explanation just weeks before the ceremony. Ryan never corrected the rumors. He simply disappeared from that chapter of his life, moved forward, and eventually met Natalie. Hearing this, Natalie struggled to understand why Ryan had hidden such an important part of his past. Everyone has previous relationships, she reminded herself. She wasn't angry that Ryan had once been engaged. She was devastated that he had buried the entire story so completely that even after 2 decades of marriage, she had never heard Vanessa's name until the woman appeared at her front door. Grant wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, he uncovered a forgotten newspaper article that completely changed the direction of the investigation. The report described an armed robbery that had taken place only weeks before Ryan and Vanessa's planned wedding. During the incident, a key witness had identified members of a dangerous criminal organization operating across several western states. Shortly afterward, that witness and close family members vanished under government protection. Among the names connected to the witness was Vanessa Monroe. She hadn't abandoned Ryan before their wedding. She had disappeared because authorities believed her life was in immediate danger. The engagement had ended overnight, not because love had failed, but because survival demanded it. Ryan had spent years believing Vanessa chose to leave him without explanation. Natalie stared silently at the old newspaper clipping. Suddenly, the ring, the secret visits, and Ryan's haunted expression began fitting together in ways she had never imagined. Yet one mystery remained unanswered. If Vanessa had returned after all these years, why now? And what was so important that Ryan believed keeping the truth from his wife was the only way to protect the life they had built together? The answers were finally within reach, but Natalie had no idea that the next conversation with Ryan would reveal a promise made decades earlier that neither time nor distance had ever completely erased. Natalie spent the entire night reading every document Grant Sullivan had gathered. The faded newspaper articles, archived court records, and witness reports painted a picture completely different from the one she had imagined only days earlier. She had convinced herself that Ryan was hiding another relationship. Instead, it appeared he had been carrying the weight of an unfinished chapter that had begun long before she entered his life. Even so, one question refused to leave her mind. If Ryan had truly believed Vanessa was gone forever, why had he kept meeting her in secret after she returned? Why hadn't he trusted Natalie enough to tell her the truth? Those questions lingered as dawn broke over the Colorado mountains. Ryan had barely spoken since returning home. He moved through the house quietly, avoiding long conversations, as though he knew the moment he finally spoke would change everything. Natalie realized she couldn't continue living between suspicion and uncertainty. She placed a folder of documents on the dining room table beside the diamond ring and asked Ryan to sit down. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence carried more emotion than any argument ever could. Ryan looked at the newspaper clipping featuring Vanessa's name, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I never wanted you to find out this way. I wanted to protect you from a story I hoped would stay in the past." Natalie looked directly at him and replied, "The truth doesn't hurt as much as being shut out. Whatever happened before we met belongs to your past. But hiding it from me made it part of our present." Ryan slowly nodded. For the first time since Natalie had found the ring, he stopped trying to avoid the conversation. More than 25 years earlier, he explained, Vanessa Monroe had been the woman he expected to spend the rest of his life with. They had planned their future together, chosen a wedding date, and even purchased matching wedding rings engraved with the words, "Forever begins." Only weeks before the ceremony, Vanessa's father witnessed a violent crime involving a powerful criminal network. After agreeing to testify, federal authorities determined that the entire family faced immediate danger. Without warning, Vanessa and her family disappeared into a witness protection program. Ryan wasn't allowed to know where they had gone or whether they were even alive. No would-be, no explanation, no final conversation. One day, they were planning a wedding. The next day, they were gone. Ryan admitted he spent years believing Vanessa had chosen to leave him. Eventually, he accepted that painful version of the story because it was the only explanation anyone could give him. Then he met Natalie. Falling in love with her gave him the chance to begin again. He buried every reminder of a life he had lost because he believed that chapter had ended forever. He never imagined it would return decades later. Natalie listened quietly as Ryan continued. Several months earlier, he had received an unexpected letter with no return address. Inside was a short handwritten message from Vanessa. She explained that the criminal case had long since ended. The threats against her family no longer existed, and she finally had the freedom to reconnect with people from her former life. She wasn't writing to rebuild a relationship. She wasn't asking Ryan to leave his wife. She simply wanted to fulfill one final promise before it was too late. Her father, now seriously ill, had spoken about Ryan often during his final years. He regretted that Ryan had never learned the truth about why the engagement ended. Before his death, he asked Vanessa to find Ryan, explain what had happened, and return the engagement ring they had never been able to exchange on their wedding day. Ryan admitted he agreed to meet Vanessa only because he believed it was the respectful thing to do. Every visit Natalie had discovered involved helping Vanessa care for her dying father, sorting through old family belongings, and bringing groceries or medication when needed. The ring Natalie found beneath the driver's seat had accidentally slipped from its small velvet box after Ryan left the house following one of those visits. He had planned to tell Natalie everything after Vanessa's father passed away, because he wanted the painful chapter to be completely finished before bringing it into their lives. Looking back, he admitted delaying that conversation had been the greatest mistake he had ever made. Tears filled Natalie's eyes, not because Ryan had once loved someone else, but because fear had convinced him that honesty could wait. She finally understood why Vanessa had appeared at her front door. Ryan had struggled for weeks to find the right moment to explain everything, while Vanessa believed Natalie already knew the truth. Neither of them realized silence was creating far more damage than the facts themselves. A few days later, Natalie agreed to meet Vanessa face to face. The meeting took place in the quiet living room of the same brick house Natalie had watched from across the street. Vanessa welcomed her warmly and introduced her to the elderly man Ryan had been helping. He was Vanessa's father, now in the final stage of a long illness. With trembling hands, he apologized to Natalie for the pain this unexpected reunion had caused. He explained that for more than 2 decades, he had carried enormous guilt for the way Ryan had been left without answers. Before authorities relocated the family, they were forbidden from contacting anyone connected to their previous lives. Breaking those rules could have placed everyone in danger. The old man admitted that one of his greatest regrets was allowing Ryan to believe he had simply been abandoned. As Natalie listened, she realized there had never been another marriage another secret family, or another hidden romance. There had only been unfinished grief shared by people whose lives had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. When Natalie, Ryan, and Vanessa finally left the house together later that afternoon, the weight each of them had carried for decades seemed noticeably lighter. Vanessa placed the diamond ring into Natalie's hand and smiled gently. "This ring was meant to represent a future that never happened," she said quietly. "It doesn't belong to me anymore, and it never belonged between your marriage." Natalie looked down at the engraving one final time before closing her hand around it. She realized that the ring had never been the real threat to her marriage. The silence had been. Ryan reached for Natalie's hand, uncertain whether she would accept it. After a long pause, she did. Trust wasn't fully restored in a single afternoon, and both of them understood that healing would take time. But for the first time since discovering the mysterious ring beneath the driver's seat, Natalie finally knew the complete truth. What remained was one final decision that would determine whether their marriage could emerge stronger than before, or whether the scars left by secrecy would continue shaping the rest of their lives. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Natalie and Ryan had experienced in their 23 years of marriage. The mystery had finally been solved, but knowing the truth didn't instantly erase the hurt. Natalie no longer questioned Ryan's faithfulness, yet she still struggled with one painful thought. If he had trusted her from the beginning, none of this would have happened. There would have been no sleepless nights, no private investigator, no silent dinners, and no fear that their entire marriage had been built on lies. Ryan understood that better than anyone. Every morning, he looked across the breakfast table and saw the woman he loved carrying a burden he had unintentionally placed on her shoulders. He couldn't change the past, but he was determined to prove that the future would be different. Instead of asking Natalie to simply forgive him, he answered every question she had with complete honesty. Some conversations lasted only a few minutes. Others continued late into the night. They spoke about his years before they met, the pain of losing Vanessa without explanation, the guilt he carried after receiving her unexpected letter, and the fear that telling Natalie everything might somehow reopen wounds that had healed long ago. For the first time in years, there were no secrets between them. Every difficult conversation became another step toward rebuilding the trust that silence had nearly destroyed. A few days later, Ryan received a phone call from Vanessa. Her father had passed away peacefully during the night. Ryan and Natalie attended the small memorial service together. It wasn't an uncomfortable experience as Natalie had once imagined it might be. Instead, it felt like the closing of a chapter that had remained unfinished for more than 25 years. During the service, several people shared stories about Vanessa's father and the difficult choices he had been forced to make to protect his family. A retired federal agent quietly explained how witness protection had saved multiple lives during one of the most dangerous criminal investigations in the region. Listening to those stories, Natalie realized that what had happened decades earlier had affected far more people than just Ryan and Vanessa. Entire families had been separated, identities had been changed, friendships had ended without explanation, and innocent people had spent years believing they had been abandoned. Before leaving the memorial, Vanessa approached Natalie one final time. She thanked her for listening without judgment and apologized again for appearing at her front door, without understanding that Ryan hadn't yet shared the truth. Natalie smiled warmly and embraced her. In that moment, there was no jealousy, no anger, and no resentment. There were simply two women whose lives had crossed because of circumstances neither of them had ever chosen. Several months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. The tension that had filled the Calloway home disappeared, replaced by something even stronger than before. Ryan no longer carried the burden of hiding his past, and Natalie no longer had to wonder whether another secret might appear without warning. One autumn afternoon, Ryan asked Natalie if she would take a drive with him. They followed a winding mountain road until they reached a quiet overlook they had visited many times during their marriage. It was the same place where Ryan had proposed more than 2 decades earlier. As they stood together watching the sun disappear behind the Colorado mountains, Ryan turned toward Natalie with tears in his eyes. He apologized once more, not for loving someone before he met her, but for believing that protecting her meant keeping the truth from her. He admitted that fear had convinced him silence was safer than honesty, and that decision had nearly cost him the greatest blessing of his life. Natalie gently squeezed his hand before answering. "The past was never the problem," she said. "The problem was that you try to carry alone. Marriage isn't about protecting each other from the truth. It's about facing the truth together." Those words stayed with Ryan long after they left the overlook, reminding him that trust isn't preserved by hiding difficult conversations. It's preserved by having them. Not long afterward, Natalie made an unexpected suggestion. Instead of storing the diamond ring in a drawer where it would continue reminding them of painful memories, she believed it should become something meaningful. After speaking with Vanessa, the two women decided to donate the ring to a local museum that featured exhibits honoring major criminal investigations and the courageous witnesses whose testimony had helped bring dangerous offenders to justice. The ring was displayed alongside a brief explanation of how ordinary families had sacrificed everything to protect others, though the names were changed to respect everyone's privacy. Visitors saw it as a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and the unexpected ways history shapes ordinary lives. For Natalie, seeing the ring behind protective glass brought an unexpected sense of peace. It no longer represented suspicion or unanswered questions. It represented closure. Ryan stood beside her as they quietly looked at the display, both understanding that some objects carry stories far greater than the people who once owned them. As the years passed, friends continued to admire Natalie and Ryan's marriage, though very few ever learned how close they had come to losing it. They celebrated another anniversary, surrounded by family, laughter, and the quiet appreciation that comes from surviving life's hardest moments together. Looking back, Natalie often reflected on the afternoon she reached beneath the driver's seat of Ryan's SUV. Finding that ring had been one of the most frightening moments of her life. At the time, she believed it marked the beginning of the end. Instead, it became the beginning of the most honest chapter their marriage had ever known. Sometimes the greatest danger to a relationship isn't another person. It isn't distance or time. It's the silence that allows fear to speak louder than the truth. And sometimes the smallest discoveries lead to the biggest conversations, the kind that remind us love isn't measured by the absence of hardship, but by the willingness to face it together. Before we end today's story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you discovered a wedding ring that wasn't yours hidden inside your spouse's car, would you confront them immediately, or would you investigate first before saying a word? Share your answer in the comments below, because every perspective tells a different story. If this story kept you guessing until the very end, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Story Chamber, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable relationship mystery. Until next time, thank you for watching, and remember that behind every unanswered question, there may be a truth far different from the one we first imagined.